Dzień dobry Państwu. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the conference on the possible and, let me say, unwelcome shift towards the centralization of the European Union. That's the subject that we're going to discuss from various national perspectives. I will introduce the panelists shortly, but let me start by welcoming Prime Minister Morawiecki, and would you please say a few words to begin with.
Thank you very much, Professor Legutko. I would like to warmly welcome, in particular, all our guests who came from different parts of Europe. I'll start with a very basic and the most dramatic and the most strategic dilemma: a European superstate or a Europe of nations. These are the polarities between we operate. Ladies and gentlemen, it's an honor to welcome you to Warsaw. I would like to extend my warm welcome also from President Jarosław Kaczyński, who couldn't be today with us, but he is wholeheartedly immersed in the whole debate about Europe. We are standing at a crossroads. Today there are two models for the development of the European Union. The first is the move, or potential move, towards a superstate with its capital in Brussels. Second is a Europe of nations. Some think that this first option may be a continuation of the Roman Empire, when in fact it is the deconstruction of Europe's rich history. And the second option is the recognition that the Union is a community of independent states. This is the concept of a Europe of nations, a Europe that respects the many local differences that exist and at the same time is based on free trade as well as intellectual and cultural exchange. Now I'm going to say a few comments about equity, inclusion, and diversity. We all know that the most cherished values in the EU today are equity, inclusion, and diversity. I tell you something that maybe some of you may find surprising. These qualities are exactly what we want. We demand equity. The Union is not a feast for the strongest. We all sit at the same table, and every member's voice is equally important, or should be equally important at least. Second, we demand inclusion. The Union should be open to every member country. The Union should accept that it is up to states to decide their own internal policies. Last but not least, we demand diversity. Each member state has its own unique culture and laws. Hundreds of years of history and tradition stand behind us. Our nations have come too far to be reduced now to the districts of Brussels superstate. Some of you might think that this is too strong a definition, but it is not. Actually, look at the changes proposed to the treaty, even the changes proposed lastly to the treaty, and this is exactly the end game which is threatening all European nations. Now let me say a few words about the migration crisis. Today we ask, what is the future of Europe? How can we protect the freedom of member states? How do we face the migration crisis? The time to address all those issues is today. In a month, in 6 months, it may be too late. We can describe the EU's migration policy in a nutshell as passing on the problem to others instead of solving them, or as some are saying, kick the can down the road. Unfortunately, this is what it is all about. Passing on to member states the problems that the border states cannot cope with. As it happens, Poland is an EU border country as well. We, too, have experienced an onslaught of economic migrants on our eastern border, drawn in by Putin and Lukashenko. And they were all instrumentalized, coming from the Middle East, from Northern Africa, tens of thousands of those. We've built this physical barrier on our border with Belarus, and it proved to be a very effective tool to fend off, to block the wave of illegal migration. However, we were aware also that opening the border to these people would mean opening up a powerful new route for people smugglers. So not only that instrument in the hands of Lukashenko and Putin, but also an instrument in people smugglers. This is what is threatening Europe today. Opening the borders to illegal immigrants will turn Europe into a highway for smugglers. The relocation mechanism itself is eminently harmful. Firstly, because instead of a systemic solution to the problem, it creates an incentive for migrants to come to Europe in even greater numbers. Secondly, because it treats the migrants themselves as objects, as things that can be moved from place to place according to the policy of the European Commission. Now let me say a few words about the Migration Pact, which was recently adopted by the Council. The Pact on Migration has just been adopted at European level. Poland expressed its negative opinion to this, but it is too late because Prime Minister Tusk did not block it at the level of EU leaders as I did for months. Let me be very blunt. What happened yesterday, the theoretical negation by this government to the Migration Pact has no effect on what is going to happen with the Migration Pact. Because the only moment of blocking this was on the level of the European Council. This is where the leaders, prime ministers and presidents sit together, and during the month of June, July, August, September, November, October, November, I was blocking this. The moment the new government started its governing, they have actually agreed to the Migration Pact in December, silently agreed to the Migration Pact in December. So don't be misled with yesterday's comments made by this government about Migration Pact. So we have to ask, where is Tusk's famed effectiveness in the EU? After all, his party claimed in the election campaign that there would be no agreement to the Migration Pact. There is an agreement, de facto agreement on the Migration Pact. Until December 13th last year, I opposed the forced relocation mechanism at every European Council. My government built coalition in the Council formations to slow down the process on the harmful mechanism of the Migration Pact. Among other things, Tusk did not block the provision obliging Poland to prepare many thousands of places for relocation illegal migrants in centers governed by the Minister of Interior and Administration. Despite apparent declarations that my government's position would be upheld, instructions for Polish negotiators changed after the 13th of December, and we have documents, we have evidence for this. There were claims that Poland would be exempted from the forced relocation due to accepting millions of Ukrainian refugees. There were claims that Poland would be a beneficiary of new funds for migrants. This was not confirmed either by the regulations of the Pact of Migration or by the revision of the EU budget adopted a few days ago. So again, don't be misled by the recent communique made by the Minister responsible for European matters. My government would never have consented to such regulations that do not take Poland's interests into account. From the very beginning of the migration crisis, the intention of Poland and the V4 countries was to protect border security and to control immigration. This is still the case today. The EU migration policy can only be shaped by unanimity, and its instruments must be voluntary in line with international conventions. It is a critical mistake to give the European Commission full power over the relocation mechanism and the determination of the financial equivalents. What are the financial equivalents in reality? They are a penalty for refusing to accept illegal immigrants. You cannot force anyone to adopt European values. You cannot force anyone to adopt European values. That is why the forced relocation of illegal immigrants will harm Europe. Europe will only be a true home for those who share true European values. Ladies and gentlemen, Europe is our home. At home, above all, we should feel free and safe. That is what we want. But we also want an ambitious Europe, a Europe that is at the forefront of the technological and economic race. To fight for the highest global stakes, we must fight for Europe's identity. Our heritage is great. So is, I believe, our future. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Now it's time to start our panel. Let me invite my co-panelists. In the order of speaking, if you allow me, first Nicola Procaccini from Italy. Yeah, could you please? The co-chairman of the ECR group. Then Margarita de la Pisa from Spain. Robert Ross from the Netherlands. Jan Zahradil from the Czech Republic. And Jacek Sariusz-Wolski from Poland. I will not pose a specific question. The general line of the debate is, of course, the proposals recently adopted by the European institutions and the reaction to these proposals in our respective countries. And first, let me ask Nicola to take the floor. Nicola, unfortunately, has to leave to catch the plane, so he will not stay with us until the end, but you have enough time to say whatever you want to say.
Thank you, dear Professor, and thank you for the invitation, especially Jacek, thank you for inviting me. Hi, Mr. President. It's a great honor for me to be here with my dear colleagues. With them, I share the same battle in the in the European Parliament, a battle stronger day by day, because not only because there are the European elections ahead of us in a few months, but also because it's a very dramatic battle about our future and even about our past. Let me say that we are the European Conservatives and Reformists group. We were born to reform Europe because, you know, for British Impulse, we were thinking to change Europe in a direction that is exactly the opposite of the direction who others decided to move European Union. Maybe today we are the ones that not only want to conserve the European values, the cultural roots, the religious roots of Europe. We are also the one, for a strange fate, that now are the most engaged in the battle to conserve the original idea of Europe, to preserve the treaty. It's a strange fate, but this is the reality. We are the one who defend the Europe in the way it was founded. Which was this way? A confederal or a political organization, not a super state. Few months ago, I don't remember exactly when, but we have had a debate like this in Brussels. There was a debate, there was a votation about the Verhofstadt report. The Verhofstadt report is exactly the manifesto of the European superstate, of this federalism organization of European Union. And that debate was dramatic. We were against, someone else was in favor. The ones in favor won that votation, suddenly. Our group was a rock in that votation. Not all the groups was the same. I remember very well, for example, the EPP splitted exactly half and half. It's a strange thing, but it shows how the political identity of EPP is so confused. And now, that report, that is not a law, but it's a trend, it's a manifesto. Now we are facing in the European elections, because the mother of the battles is exactly this. It's the battle among the ones who want a super state and the ones who want a community of sovereign states. But let me repeat again that the original idea was not a super state, was a community of sovereign states. So we are the one on the good side of story, of the past and of the future. Unfortunately, the superstate is a trend that has been going on for several years. And this process of the subtracting competence, taking away competence from nation was helped often by European Court of Justice, because you know the judges were appointed by the government. The governments were leftist for the majority. So the European Court of Justice was a tool to force the European Union toward this superstate model. We are fighting against this model because we believe in a confederational, in a confederalist organizations. Let me explain that in a confederalist organizations, the nations are free and sovereign. They are united in an alliance that does few but important things. At the opposite, in a federalist organization, the nation simply do not exist and are reduced to administrative bodies. So obviously, this is something that we must fight, because we love our nations, because the Europe nation does not exist. Exists a cultural root, exists a community of states, but not a nation. And during this electoral campaign for the European Parliament, you will hear the left, at not only the left, even some parties of the center, talk about the United States of Europe. It sounds good. It sounds strong. It sounds Hollywood. But it has a bad meaning, a very bad meaning. It means reducing Italy or Poland or Spain to the status of Alabama, of Canton Ticino in Switzerland, or I don't know, Bavaria in Germany. These are not nations. Alabama is not a nation, it's a state. Italy or Poland are nations. So I don't know if we will be able to explain exactly how crucial is the appointment with the date of 9 June. I don't know exactly when do you vote in Poland, but more or less the days are that. It's maybe the most crucial of our history, because the European citizens will have to decide which model they want to adopt. The superstate, and so the destroy of the nations, or a community of European nations. That confederal organism, that is the original idea of European Union, the one of the treaty in Rome of 52, the one of Charles de Gaulle, the one of Winston Churchill, the one of Margaret Thatcher, the one of many others, fathers of Europe. But it's not the idea of the ones who ruled the European Union in the last years. So we are against this attempt to take away competences from nations to give them to the European Union. We will defend not only our nation, we will defend even the original idea of Europe, of European Union. I don't know who will win, but I'm sure, thank you, but I'm sure that we will do our best to preserve the past and the futures of our citizens. So this is why, Jacek, I think this is a very important moment, this panel, this debate, this event. This is why I hope that in the next months we will discuss about this choice, because this is the choice. Obviously, inside the European elections we can discuss about everything, but at the top of the debate there's a choice between a superstate or a community of sovereign states. I'm sure that if we will be able to explain to our citizens how important is this choice, I think we will have an incredible result. We must be strong, we must be focused on the challenge, and we must win for us, for the ones before us, and for the ones who will come after us. Thank you very much. Thank you, Professor. Thank you, dear colleagues. Thank you, Mr. Morawiecki. Thank you all.
Yes, go ahead. Thank you, Nicola. Yes, ultimately the choice is between those who are in favor of sovereignty and those who are against sovereignty. It's remarkable, by the way, that the concept of sovereignty, which has had such a noble tradition, has fallen into disrepute among those who are in charge of the European Union. But that's a marginal remark. Now let me give the floor to Margarita de la Pisa, Vox Party, Spain. I forgot to tell you, of course, interpretation is available. Polish is channel 1, English channel 2, and Spanish channel 3. Margarita.
Sí, espero a que podáis tener la interpretación.
I hope you can hear the interpretation, and I'm happy to be able to speak in my own language. First of all, let me start by thanking you very much for organizing this meeting and for inviting me. It's very important that you have raised this issue, which is absolutely paramount for the future of Europe. And I'm very happy to have a number of eminent people here who are members of our political group, Mr. Procaccini, Mr. Legutko. And I think this topic is absolutely of utmost importance. Some people might think we are exaggerating, but like Nicola said, we are ahead of what is the most important election in recent years. What is happening right now is that we are leaving our countries, our nation states, in the hands of others. It's like a war is starting right in front of our eyes, and we're not taking part in it. If we want to be responsible politicians, this would be the biggest treason to let our nations fall into the hands of an organization that's not even properly planned out and organized. Now, the mandate that we have, and I'm actually one of the original MEPs. Let me tell you about everything that happened behind it. We had a conference on the future of Europe which
pero
had
esto
been
no tiene nada, tiene una
pre-planned.
estrategia detrás.
It seemed that everything was spontaneous, but it wasn't at all. It's all behind, I should say, there is a big strategy behind it. And we started talking about the citizens of Europe. Now, we represent all different parts of Europe, I thought. And suddenly there were some very strange representatives of Europe. Now, we don't have to look for them elsewhere. We are the representatives of Europe. If you want to know the opinion of the citizens, ask us, because we represent them. And these so-called spontaneous citizens who took the floor, it was very suspicious. It seemed that everybody knew the conference was coming up and everybody had prepared what to say. Now, obviously by that time all the European institutions had been warped and they had a certain outlook on the future of Europe. In Spain, the People's Party asked for 3 representatives, and we also said that one of them should be a representative of the Vox party that I represent, but that did not happen. And that's why there was a politician there who's for the independence of the Basque country.
Nosotros enseguida, porque aquí tengo que decir que el trabajo que han hecho nuestros compañeros diputados,
so even the composition of the people who took part in the discussion was sort of fake. Mr. Legutko knows about it very well. He was head of the group that we were at the conference about the future of Europe. And I want to thank him for his very hard work, both Professor Legutko and other representatives of that group. It seems to us that it was very well organized.
Bueno, luego encima ocurría que encima lo que se sacaba de estas asambleas ni siquiera era lo que luego fueron las conclusiones, que ya estaban escritas.
The impression we had was that this was not organized in line with democratic principles. And even the conclusions of the conference, as it turned out, had been written prior to the conference. So a certain group of people were selected on the basis of unknown criteria, and they decided that some new additions had to be added to the conclusions, even if the citizens had never been asked to talk about it freely. So this representation of the citizens should be changed. And there were other farcical moments when, for example, there were 4 Germans, mostly the MEPs who don't believe in a Europe of sovereign states, and they were free to speak, which they did. I remember somebody said that this conference could be called a conference on the future of Germany, not Europe, because it was very clear that Germany would be the main country in Europe. So that working group developed a report that proposes a structure of power that sells our independence and hands it over into the hands of a superstate. It's not a federal system, it's not a confederacy, and actually this could be compared to the United States of America, where suddenly the decisions will be made at a completely different level than before. It's not true that the division of competences is that the EU only intervenes where nation-states can't make a decision. In fact, this is about handing over independence and sovereignty. Suddenly, the European countries will be forced to change their constitutions without the approval of their national parliaments. So the citizens of Europe would not be able to use our own national elections to choose who we want to represent us.
a dar más soberanía a los Estados miembros.
So we want reforms, but going in a different direction. We want to give more power to national states. We don't need a change of the treaties because a large part of our powers has already been transferred to European institutions, and in part we were already sold in terms of our sovereignty, in terms of industry, trade. In many situations, we depend on third countries, whose political system is not trustworthy from our point of view because they represent completely different values than us. And it's not about applying this. All that's happening in Europe right now questions the sovereignty of states. And it's happening without any legal basis. There is no legal basis for these changes to be introduced. But my colleague MEP Rafalska can certify that we witnessed together that, and it's about labor conditions, about European security. You keep hearing about certain European powers, but when it comes to pay, it's not decided this way. This should be a decision of nation states, of sovereign states, and suddenly this is being transferred to institutions that are not really very credible. And there's also some delay. What's happening in Europe is not implemented in sovereign states. You need some time for any changes to be enforced. When the Green Deal was voted on, we instantly understood where this is going to take us. And we warned our countries, but our countries have been occupied with other problems. The transposition of European provisions takes years into national legislation, but we noticed it straight away, even before it was introduced into our legal systems. We saw that it was very dangerous. We are still involved in this debate. We are fully aware of that, at least in Spain, and we cannot be traitors of our own country. In Spain, we've already been through a period where Europe appeared to support the people who were in favor of the independence of the Basque country of Catalonia. One of the Catalonian independence politicians was called a European in Europe. So we are to pay tribute to Europe, but on what grounds? Europe is not always guarding our sovereignty and democracy. Many competences, many powers are transferred into the hands of institutions where we are not well represented. The elections will be essential. I'd like to emphasize that again.
Thank you, Margarita. You made a very important point. I mean, several important points, but the European Union functions on the basis of a very simple principle, which is more Europe. Whatever happens, more Europe. Something goes wrong, more Europe. Something is right, that happens too, more Europe. And not only does it insult human intelligence, but also it's extremely dangerous. Your point about federalism, if you take the United States of America or any other federalist country, the dividing lines between the competences of Alabama and Washington are much firmer and stronger than the dividing lines between the competences of the member states in the EU and the European institutions. So perhaps, I hope not, will come a time we will be looking forward to the sovereignty of at the level of Alabama. Okay, now we're going to the Netherlands. Bob Ross. Yeah. Thank you, Nicola. Yeah, sure.
Well, thank you so much for having me here and inviting me here at this very important conference, especially to Mr. Saryusz-Wolski, who asked me to speak over here. And I'm always very happy to be in Warsaw, and I really mean it. When I walk on the streets over here, and I compare that with Brussels, in the Netherlands, I live in a small town, and it's very doable. But from Monday till Thursday, I live in Brussels. And what I see over there, homeless people, I see crimes, I see drugs. And when I come to Warsaw, it's clean and I feel very safe. And I think you are a true example of how our Western society should look like. Be proud of that. So I want to start with a question. Why was the EU funded? And the answer is to have an economic cooperation between member states, the internal market, and with respect to the nation states. And it's supposed to make people's lives better. And I was here 15 years ago for the first time, and I have seen an incredible progress here in Poland. And I think it worked. It worked, and of course also, of a good conservative government. But we must never forget one rule. We must never forget one rule: subsidiarity. Article 5 of the treaty says that the limits of the union competences are governed by the principle of conferral. The use of the union competences is governed by the principle of subsidiarity and proportionality. So what does that mean? European should be, no, it means European, what should be European, but national, what can be done nationally. Unfortunately, that is not the way it goes. That is why we are here today. The bureaucrats, centralists in Brussels are addicted to power. And I will explain 6 ways they use to gain more and more power in time. And first, they use or they abuse every crisis. Financial crisis, COVID crisis, Ukraine crisis, energy crisis. And the solution is always the same, and the professor already said it: more European Union. If there's no crisis, and that's the second point, if there's no crisis, they create a crisis. For example, climate change. They call it an existential threat, and the solution is the Green Deal. The Green Deal destroyed our energy system. It is destroying our food system. They are trying to control CO2, but if you control CO2, you control people, because everything we do in life is about CO2 emissions. Living, breathing, eating, traveling, living. So if you can control that, you can control people's lives. The second part is what they do, and that's the other topic here in this mandate of the European Parliament, and that is the war on disinformation. And it's about the end of free speech. It's about censorship. Free speech is the fundamental of the democracy. And free speech is not only a right, it is an obligation. If we want a decent democracy, we need free speech. But now they introduced the digital identity and the central bank digital currency. So they can see everything we do, and they can control everything we do, because they can shut off our financial system whenever they want. We have seen it already in Canada during the COVID crisis. We can have a complete conference about that too, but those 2 topics, it's used to create a centralized, controlled economy, and at the same time, it's taking away people's freedom. The third thing is that what I call a goat trail in the existing treaties. For example, the 800 billion euros common debt via the COVID recovery fund. And nothing is as permanent as something temporarily implemented by the bureaucrats. Once it's there, it will never disappear. The fourth thing is EU centralists simulate democracy participation by sitting at the table with so-called NGOs, which are paid by the same governments. The European Union spent 3.7 billion euros per year for left liberal hobbies, immigration, gender policies, climate change. The fifth thing is the European Court of Justice. The primacy of the European Union law. The EU law supersedes national law. And that's a problem because the ECJ is politicized. And I don't have to explain that further because I know you had some serious fight with them when you were in government. And the sixth thing, and that's my last point, and that's now the treaty changes. Even if only a small part of this treaty changes is adopted, they will gain much more power. And it will turn our nation states into provinces of Brussels. National parliaments are not relevant anymore. People go out for the vote just for show, because almost everything will be decided in Brussels. We are discussing the treaty changes here today, but what I have to explain is that we are facing a gigantic machine that is called the European Commission, where 35,000 civil servants working on a daily basis to an ever closer union, and they will use everything they can to reach that goal. We are heading to a big European superstate. They want to abolish the nation state because once that happens, they have complete control. We are heading to what I call a new kind of communism. And people from my country and also from the other Western countries will not recognize that because our generation was born in freedom. But you have seen communism and you were able to win that 30 years ago. But this is a new kind of communism. It's a communism of technocrats. Let's learn from the history. In the 1930s, Stalin declared the war on farmers. He took their land and millions of people died. They starved to death. In the 1960s, Mao did exactly the same. The Great Leap Forward. Also, over here, the farmers and the food system were attacked, and also millions of people died. But they gained control over all the people. So I come back to my first question. Is the EU making people's lives better now? I don't think so. We have 24 languages and 27 cultures, and that is what makes Europe so beautiful. We have a very rich history that we should be proud of, and as conservatives should do everything to conserve that. I come to my conclusion. Am I happy with the Lisbon Treaty? No. I think we already went too far giving away our national competences. And the funny thing is, our common friend, Frans Timmermans, agreed on that in 2013, when he was the Minister of Foreign Affairs. He took the initiative to investigate how to reverse EU power. But then, this is the document. This is really, and it is a big document, but with all proposals to reverse what happened already at that time. But then he went to the EU and he became one of the worst bureaucrats ever. The same happened with Guy Verhofstadt. He was pretty conservative too, and now he is the champion of the Conference of the Future of Europe. We should never give up the Lisbon Treaty unless we reverse the ever closer union and get more power back to the nation states, but it will be very difficult. The national parliaments should be the highest institution in our national states. We have EU elections in June, and we should get all the EU critical people to go out for the vote, because that is really the problem. Only the people who believe in an ever closer union go out to the vote, and what we see in the European Parliament, there is no real reflection of our society. 75% of the people is really in favor of an ever closer union, and we have only 25% of the people who are really have common sense. We should change that. It should be at least a reflection of our society. That means that we all. That means also that we really have to work together this time with the EU critical delegations. We don't have the luxury to be divided on other important topics. In the name of our children and grandchildren, the main goal must be to stop the globalists, to stop the wokists, and to make the nation state our priority by working together with all the conservatives in the European Parliament and the European Council. United, we must stand. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rob. You mentioned Article 5 of the Treaty of the European Union, which is an extremely important article because it stipulates that there are three principles, right, that should check the growing power of European institutions. That is subsidiarity, proportionality, and conferral. And this article has been dead for a long time. Never ever, to my knowledge, has the European Court of Justice ruled against the European institution in favor of the member state on the basis of Article 5. And this, I think, shows the bias of the European Court of Justice. Not only this, the other instances. And also you mentioned the strange peregrination of Mr. Timmermans' mind. But there is also a possibility of the reverse direction. Michel Barnier, another big man, right, in the European Union. Mr. Europe, he was the main negotiator with the Brits leading to the Brexit, a very tough centralist. Once he finished his job, he became a sovereignist in France and was speaking in favor of France's breaking its relations with the European legal system. So there is hope. Okay, Jan Zahradil from Prague, Czech Republic.
Panie profesorze, panie premierze, panie Jacku,
Professor, Prime Minister, Jacek, ladies and gentlemen.
Now I switch to English. It seems to be a simple question with a simple answer. EU has been always organization or community of sovereign states because they were always a bedrock or cornerstones of the integration, and everything which is now being executed on the European level is there only because we as member states agreed with that. But on the other hand, you have a very strong lobby that is trying to shift or to change this community of sovereign states into superstate, into one single superstate. That lobby sits in many European institutions. It's very strong, particularly in the European Parliament, and it's being fueled by Euro-federalist agenda. And if I may follow what Rob already said, They are very good in promoting that creeping shift of power upwards from national level to European level, step by step, treaty by treaty, slice by slice. It's kind of salami method since 1992. If you look at all those treaty changes, starting with the Maastricht Treaty to the current Lisbon Treaty, you could see, even physically, this salami method going on. And they are indeed very instrumental in using or misusing every crisis. There's a famous slogan which says, never waste a good crisis, and this might be a slogan of every federalist, because they do that for justifying their approach. Financial crisis. They used it for introducing banking and fiscal union, which de facto turned into a debt union. Migration crisis, they used for introducing common migration and asylum policy, which in fact is trying to deprive us from our very fundamental attribute of national sovereignty, and this is the right to decide who can come into my territory and who can live there and who cannot. So that is the final aim of this common migration and asylum policy. And even the climate crisis, or let's say climate change problem, has been misused for introducing a Green Deal, a pan-European, unprecedented pan-European exercise in social engineering that should change the very fundamentals of our national economies and therefore our ways of life as well. And last but not least, and I have to tell it now because I think that it's been pretty much overlooked until now, also Russian war on Ukraine is being misused as a last step for pursuing Euro-federalist agenda. And please let me make 2 points which I believe are very fundamental for this particular issue. There are 2 points of concern for me. We can hear that we need EU unity without any exceptions to face Russia, to tackle Putin, to fight them, to curb them. That's true. This is right in principle. But unfortunately, this is not right in the methods being proposed by Euro-federalists, because such European unity must grow up from our common awareness, from our feeling that we have a common enemy, and cannot be derived from arbitrary change of decision-making technology, which is exactly what Euro-federalists are planning and are doing by proposing removal of national veto and replacing that by qualified majority vote. If that happens, it will have profound consequences that will go far beyond Ukraine war, and that will probably influence a lot of other agendas as well. Yes, we have to be united, and we are for European unity vis-à-vis Putin, but not for this price. We can hear, remarks like, look at Orban, he's blocking everything, he is blackmailing us, and so on and so on. Yeah, maybe you might not like Orban, but you cannot sacrifice one of our very fundamental rights, one of very pillars of state sovereignty, which is the right to execute national veto, just to squeeze one state or one government, because if it happens to one state and one government in one particular agenda, it could happen to every and each of us in some other agenda. There will be, we know that we are not living in the world that we probably were used to some 25 years ago. This world is not anymore unipolar, it's not even bipolar, it's multipolar. So we will be facing a lot of questions, a lot of debates in upcoming future, questions about our common defense capabilities, industries and productions, even maybe some debate about EU branch of armed forces, hopefully complementary to NATO. Also, even strategic autonomy could be debated because if we look at the development in the United States, we have to admit ourselves that US are and will not be probably that much interested in European issues and in pursuing transatlantic agenda like it used to be and like we were used to. Okay, but we have to lead this debate on an equal basis with all states, all participants, big, small, northern, southern, eastern, western, equal. And we must not let just a few big guys to run this whole business. So that's point number one, about qualified majority vote and threats that are being somehow included into that principle. Secondly, and this is probably my even worst concern, we can listen a lot about the necessity to fight Russian propaganda, fake news, disinformations, and things like that. Yes, no one can deny this is happening. We all know that Russia is very good in spreading its propaganda abroad. But we have to understand that if Euro-federalists say that, they have always some hidden agenda behind that. And this hidden agenda is to delegitimize all critical or dissent or non-mainstream voices, all Euro-critical or soft Eurosceptic voices, which means us, to push us out of democratic corridor, to silence us. We can hear, that it's necessary to identify and to fight anti-European or anti-Western narratives. Come on, what does it mean? This is us. This is us, because in fact what they want to fight is every anti-Euro-federalist narrative which they consider to be anti-European or anti-Western. There is a committee, a special committee in the European Parliament which is called INGE, which is focused on monitoring the foreign interference into our democratic processes. It's already prepared 2 reports which have been adopted by the European Parliament. And in those reports, we are indirectly but repeatedly attacked. And I don't think that we should buy this. In the social media, if you raise your voice, if you say, well, you should not do that, you can be very easily labeled as a Putin troll or Kremlin puppet or Russian agent or whatever, which of course is not true. This is only the attempt to despise us, to delegitimize us, and somehow to spread some kind of propaganda against every Euro-critical voice. What is the final aim of all that? Of course, Euro-federalists want to dominate public discourse. They want to control public space, discussion space. They even want to have the option or the possibility to ban, technically, some opinions which are uncomfortable for them. That definitely is something like soft censorship. And of course, they are also very keen to be able to define and to pursue and to have some official propaganda line, Euro-federalist line, funded by state or public, but also private sources. There is, in fact, a very strong lobby behind all that. That lobby is created by part of national and supranational bureaucracy that is seeking for more control, more power, and more possibility to regulate. Then we have mainstream media that, of course, would be happy to reduce competition and to get rid of certain competitors like, all those alternative media outlets and so on. And last but not least, we have also NGOs and experts that feel or smell money from various funds and grants and whatever programs and projects, and that's it. And I think that it's a very sensitive ground, because once you start to talk about that, you can be immediately attacked from succumbing to, the enemy or to to the foreign enemy propaganda. But I think we have to be courageous enough to talk about it openly. There are, and it has been also mentioned here by, I think, by Rob, there are even some legal acts that have been already adopted. The Digital Services Act, and I would advise you to be very vigilant how you implement it into your national legal order, because if it is implemented in a wrong way, it could be a tool how to reduce the freedom of speech or the freedom of expression. There is another which is so-called Media Freedom Act, which is about everything else than media freedom. This is about, you know, the possibility to interfere from the supranational level to our national media markets and to regulate it as well. So, ladies and gentlemen, these were two examples how Eurofederalists are trying to misuse even the latest and the most serious political crisis on our continent in decades, which is the Russian war against Ukraine. We should not be misled by their so-called good intentions, because they are not that good. There are hidden agendas behind that, and please be therefore very vigilant whenever we listen from them that we have to be united for any price or every price, and we have to fight the disinformation and propaganda, all that stuff, because believe me, there is always something behind that. There is always some hidden agenda behind that, and we should be very, very, very vigilant not to lose one another piece, one another slice of our free space, which we still have. Dziękuję bardzo za uwagę.
Dziękuję. Thank you. Yes, the question of monopoly is extremely important. A political monopoly that has grown in Europe, the mainstream parties with predictable consequences. The outcome of it is that those who are in charge of the European Union are organically or have become organically unable to accept that somebody might have an opinion that is different than their own. I mean, they act in irritation whenever they meet somebody who has a different opinion. And it's not only a question of opinion, it's also a question of certain regulations or practices. The institution of cordon sanitaire. I mean, something unthinkable in Parliament. It's been practiced for some time in the European Parliament. When we are dismayed by the outrageous action of the Poland's current government against the opposition, I mean, come on, that's nothing new. I mean, that comes from the European Union. That's the way. That's the reason why the European Union is thrilled and ecstatic about how the current government deals with the opposition. So this danger of political monopoly and ideological monopoly is still there, and it's becoming more and more acute every day. The mere idea that the European Commission may be in charge of the freedom of speech is, I mean, ridiculous. It's like giving matches to a pyromaniac. Panie ministrze, bardzo proszę teraz, a później będą możliwe pytania, głosy z sali, także proszę się już przygotować. Be prepared.
From the floor.
If there's a pyromaniac, there is a need for fire brigade, and that's us. Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman and Mr. Prime Minister, dear guests. I want to touch upon 4 issues. First, what is the plan? The plan of those about whom we speak here. Second, what is the choice? I will refer here to those 2 visions which Prime Minister Morawiecki in his opening mentioned. Then my point 3 will be to debunk, to demystify 3 falsifications, 3 myths about democracy, federalism and enlargement. And then point number 4, the old question, what to do? Что делать? What is in the plan? I spent 1.5 years and hundreds of hours in the Verhofstadt group, some call it gang, but there were 5 Spinellis and myself. So imagine how easy task was there. And the product is the plan to have this centralized super state. It is a long story, 100 pages, but it turns the EU as we know, as imperfect as it is, upside down. It makes of EU tries to make, proposes to make a state and proposes member states to be reduced to the role of lender, regions, voivodeships in the Polish case. It is a new treaty. If you read the document, and it is in all the official languages of the EU now accessible on the website of the European Parliament, you can read that it is de facto a new treaty. 245 final version changes in most of articles of key significance. It proposes a stunning number of new competences for the Union. They make difference between exclusive and shared competences. But shared competences, as defined in Article 2, Indent 2, it is a competence which belongs to the EU, and EU may decide whether it uses it to full 100% or whether there's something remaining or not for the member states. And it is about climate, foreign policy, security policy, border policy, industry, education, health, border infrastructure. I'm asking, what is left for the member state? Ścieżki drogowe I rowerowe.
Bicycle paths.
I don't know. I don't know how it is in English. Anyway, I mean the really nitty-gritty local decisions. What does it mean for the regions? And I told it to the ECR group in the Committee of the Regions. The consequences, the regions, if states are become regions, regions will become nothing. There will be no competences for self-government on the regional and local level. It's totally changing the constitutional nature of the EU. And then veto. What is veto? Veto in all those areas in the treaty means we member states, which are the masters of the treaty, which are the voice of the people, which are founders of the EU, we do not want this competence to belong to the EU. And we may exceptionally agree if all of us agree on that. That's why we safeguard the veto. So it's the bastion of sovereignty. And they propose to liquidate a massive liquidation of veto, which means massive transfer of powers from the nation-state level to the EU in 34 cases of fundamental importance, impossible to foreign security, border, taxation, budget, everything. So this is really a qualitative change and not quantitative. It's not 245 amendments. It's not 8 new competences for the Union, remaining few for member states. It's not 34 vetoes eliminated, but it is a new construct. A sovereign would be Union, and member states would be not sovereign. Today, the quoted Article 5 sets the limits of the competences of the Union. And in this new plan, it is in this legal environment, it is the member states who decide how much competences the Union have. It's so-called deferral principle. But now, Union would decide what competences remain in the hands of the member states. So upside down. A sovereign and non-sovereign vassals. So qualitative change. That's the plan. That's why this is, as somebody said in this panel, mother of choices. It is an existential choice. There were some references made already to the past and to the fathers, to the beginnings of our union. But Schuman, quotation, said, "My idea is not to connect countries to create a superstate." Spinelli, and 5 of the 6 of Verhofstadt group were Spinellis, from the left to the EPP, said, "My aim is to liquidate member states, to liquidate nation states." And many of you, my colleagues, you said, starting with Nicola Procaccini, how important nation state is as a fundament and pillar of democracy and rights of citizens. So what is being proposed to build? An oligarchic centralized superstate where governs the principle of institutional, legal, and financial violence, object of which was the government of Prime Minister Morawiecki, when illegally, unlawfully they blocked the funds and exerted unlawful pressure on our country. But they did it to others, to Hungary, but they do it to Italy, and will do to others. So it is a new construct. Sovereign, suzerain, and vassals, to use feudal terminology. Center and peripheries, to use economic development theories. And the methods is a logic of force, logic of coercion. And that would need, and I advise you to read the 10 arguments why such a superstate would become an authoritarian superstate. I can't resume that. It's an article by Dariusz Lipiński in Wszystko co najważniejsze. But if something is being done against the will of the people and nations, it must be authoritarian. It must use enforcement. I remember a union or community when there was no such a language like enforcement. Now when you read the community, EU texts in several years, enforcement is the king of fair phrases and words. They want to enforce everything. What does it mean enforce? To do something against somebody's will. That's why it leads to authoritarian rule in such a construct as superstate. I'll just mention that if it is needed by some of our political opponents, is because behind there is even a bigger mega plan. It's a geopolitical project of European superstate of imperial nature in close alliance and collaboration with Asian power, which is Putin's Russia. And this plan is called From Lisbon to Vladivostok. For that reason, they have to abolish the sovereignty of member states to do it and to plot this Eurasian geopolitical space without agreement of the nation states of today's EU. And that plan is to have Russia in, America out, and Germany up. The contrary of what was the three funding principles of NATO. Germans down, Russians out, Americans in. So it's also geopolitically a counter-project to our world of transatlantic security and transatlantic civilizational values. Let me speak about 3 myths which are being promoted by mainstream and we should oppose. First is about federal nature. I will disagree with all my colleagues here who continue to use the terminology Euro-federalists, Federation, United States of Europe. No, they don't want federal Europe. What is a fundamental principle of federalism? Be it federal Germany, Swiss Federation, which calls itself Confédération Suisse, Helvétique, and America. Component parts are equal. There is quasi-equality of Länder in Bundesrat. There is equality of canton in the Conseil Helvétique. And there is equality to every state in the United States, big or small, is equal. 2 representatives in the Senate. In EU, we already have the anti-federal principle. The bigger your population is, the more weight you have. This is called double majority voting system. It's fundamentally anti-federal. They use this term federal because it sounds nice. It has positive connotations. No, it is a centralized superstate. It is not a federation. Imagine, and if one tries to explain to Americans that it is not United States of Europe modeled on the United States of America. Imagine United States governed by New York State, Texas State, and California. 3 biggest states and others having nothing to say. In EU, if you take Germany, France, Italy, and Spain, 57% of population, all the 23 other member states have nothing to say. They're outvoted immediately because, I mean, the number of states to co-opt, easy in this clientelistic union mechanism. So it is not a federal project. What does it resemble? I'm not a historian, but some say that it resembles Second Reich, Cesarstwo Niemieckie, German Empire of 1871, when all the small principautés, principalities, merged, but the master was Prussia, and that was Bismarck. And that's what Germans want and what French blindly support and others blindly follow. Non-democratic, by the way. So don't be seduced by this term federalist and switch to the proper terminology. They're centralizers and superstatists. And to use the old terminology, imperialists, in fact. Second, it brings more democracy. Oh my God. All that they did by manipulating the continental future of Europe, as has shown to us Madame, the Vox representative de la Pisa. It is a total Potemkin village, the conference, a staged thing without true citizens' voice. It is undemocratic because of the content, I'll explain briefly, and it is anti-democratic because of its form. In terms of content, because they move there's a massive move and transfer of power, of competence and power to the EU level, where there's weak democracy, to say the least, and where there's a huge deficit of democracy, where every political scientist agrees, and there are kilometers of bookshelves on that. And we know how weak is democracy and our parliamentary control over the Commission, and how self-governing is the bureaucracy or oligarchic structures of the EU. So, taking away from member states decisions where democracy functions, emptying their competences, and putting at the level where there's no democracy, no democratic accountability, no control, and then oligarchy can do whatever they want. Globalists, regional, whatever. And then question arises, why to elect national governments if their competences would be region-like at the best? They would be emptied. As Prime Minister of such a government, you would be rather a voivod, Prime Minister Morawiecki, than a Prime Minister in the sense of the Polish Constitution. All those, but it was already mentioned, means a flagrant violation of the principle of subsidiarity, principality, proportionality, and the third principle, which is often forgotten, proximity, Article 10. We have to be close to the citizens. Proximity principle, rarely evoked. So it is undemocratic because it moves things to less democratic from more democratic, bypassing the voice of the people towards autocracy rather than democracy without people's consent. It's kind of a political rape without consent. They're hijacking Europe, like in the Greek myth when Zeus has hijacked, abducted Europa. But it is not only in the plan of this treaty, 245 amendments, it's happening as we live and witness. It is called competence creep. You call it salami, Jan. Yes. Step by something which we call in Poland falandyzacja prawa, which means extending the law, going beyond the law, which a legal term describes as ultra vires, and by simply violating treaties. That's competence creep. And that's already described in detail by literature, scientific literature. And the third element is creating superstate without us knowing that it is a superstate by common debt and common taxes. Common debt is there. There's a new proposal to have another after COVID debt for Ukraine. And in the MFF, there is hidden the project of 3 new taxes. EU center of government, which means Commission, wants to be independent from any influence, they would call it blackmail, from member states who have to decide on contributions. They want to have their own resources. They call it own resources, which means not member states. What does it mean? That member states would be deprived of those revenues. Their coffers would be emptier. And what is one of the attributes since the beginning of history of a sovereign prince? It was to have its own taxes, customs at the border, and dinar, money. Euro would be obligatory in this plan. So taxes and debt, it is something which in literature about American creation of the United States of America was called Hamiltonian moment. Common debt and common taxes means state. And that is being done without any change of the treaties, unnoticed, and hidden from the people. And the third myth, we needed to do what we should do towards our eastern neighbors, Ukraine. Enlargement necessitates this deeper union, as they call it. The vast academic empirical research, and we have 9 or 11 authors, serious, published analysis. Every enlargement from the 6 members of the European Community until the Big Bang enlargement in 2004, accelerated decision-making process, facilitated, never hampered, never slowed down. It is even confirmed in the working paper by the Secretariat of the Council. To the contrary, in many cases, enlargements accelerated and brought about improvement in decision-making. So this is huge fake. We need to centralize. We need to have a super state to be able to welcome Ukraine. And the scientific literature on the subject goes further. If you want to enlarge, not expand, some use this unfortunate term, expansion, we need to decentralize, not centralize. What we would propose to reverse, it was Procaccini who has, no, it was you, yes, this document of young Timmermans, to reverse the changes, to repatriate. What does Article 48 of the treaty says? You may change the treaty in order to increase or decrease the competences of the Union. Never happened and never was considered or studied. But there are many competences which should not be there, because they would be better, according to the definition of subsidiarity, implemented on the national level than transferred to the EU level. So there's factually wrong and politically biased thesis that enlargement necessitates deepening. No, enlargement necessitates decentralization, repatriation, and in a way to do something, sorry for quoting Jean-Claude Juncker, who said at the beginning of his term, EU should be big on big things and small on small things. Should be doing only what others, which mean member states, cannot separately do. Now EU is grabbing more and more power to the detriment of its efficiency, to the detriment of the nation states, to the detriment of the citizens' rights. That's why it's a totally fake argument, and now we will be voting, I think, next Strasbourg, the Austrevicius report on enlargement and reform of the Union. And I've been shouting and crying, saying, take into account this empirical, scientific, unquestioned study and conclusion that there is no necessity to deepen. And they are politically deaf and blind. They don't want to admit. They don't want to admit because they want to have an empire. And they are just using, as somebody said here, war, Ukraine or any other crisis, to grab more power, necessary or not necessary. There are areas, yes, but not those which they propose. And the final argument is that while proposing to eliminate 34 most important vetoes on foreign security, defense, everywhere, the decision to enlarge remains with a veto. So they say, we want to enlarge, to reform, to be able to enlarge. For that reason, we want to eliminate vetoes, but we do not eliminate veto on enlargement, because the big boys want to be able at the last moment to stop Ukraine, which is the hidden plan. Hypocrisy to the highest degree. And now conclusions, what to do. First of all, we should have proper diagnosis of what is happening. It's not federal, it's not democratic, it is imperial superstate project, not in the interest of nations of EU of today. It's a creeping coup, constitutional one, and we have, as many at this rostrum said, we are the defenders of EU. We are the defenders of Schumann's Europe. We are the defenders, however strange it may sound, with all the criticism we may have about the Lisbon Treaty. We are defenders of Lisbon Treaty. And one of my, it was not my idea, but one of my interviews title was Lisbon or Death, to follow the Nietzsche albo śmierć. Nice. Nice or death. Nietzsche muerte. Once Poles remember. So, we have to propose reversing some centralization, repatriating some competences, but it is not for today. First, we have to stop. We have to stop this mega plan, harmful, detrimental, of existential importance plan to take away, to liquidate EU, in fact, and to replace it with a superstate, imperial superstate in the hands of 2-3 big states and oligarchic mainstream structures. I proposed, but it was during the works on this new treaty, to create a subsidiarity chamber in the European Court of Justice to check whether principles of subsidiarity and proportionality is rejected. They don't want, they were so honest, they say, no, we don't want, there is unfortunately subsidiarity in the treaty, but we are not going to practice it. Yes, there is Article 5, but we are not going to practice. They were so frank. I propose a red card, that 50% of national parliaments can stop any legislation proposed by Brussels. No. So we have to defend, to defend and try to save EU as a community of sovereign states, united in diversity, Schumann's Europe, against the hijacking by the centralist ideology. To defend EU and treaties against abduction, to restore subsidiarity and proportionality as enshrined in the Article 5 of the treaty, to restore the consensus-building community and move away from the community which is being born in front of our eyes into a punitive, coercive community, no longer community, empire. Everybody is in quarrel, some quarrel. Most, or big amount of member states are punished or stigmatized by Brussels. And when Poland was first, and others thought, no, it's them, it will not be us. But they're coming now for Greece, they're coming for Spain, they will come for every member state if we allow this to continue. And to end, once EU got Nobel Prize for Peace, it was said that it is a peace project. We are somehow believing or even repeating without much criticism this main narrative of mainstream, of everybody in manuals. We teach EU, our community integration, was created to have peace in Europe after the Second World War. But listen to Timothy Snyder, Harvard lecturer. He says, no. After the Second World War, the losers or half losers, they were not peaceful. They made their wars in Algeria. They made their wars in Indochina. And then after failing as empires, they wanted to remain imperial after the Second World War. And this is not a peace project, it is a post-colonial project. That's the message from Tim Snyder. And why it's useful to evoke it now? Because it re-becomes a colonial project. The center, hegemon, oligarchy wants to colonialize others which are not equal, which are supposed to be not equal, like in this Orwellian equal and more and less, those who are equal and those who are less equal than others. So we have to say no to this imperial project, to the superstate, and at the end of the road, to defend those who are electing us, citizens. Because tomorrow, their rights, some of you spoke about censorship, some of you spoke about what values they will no longer be able to preserve or to cherish. They will be deprived without knowing it, because all that is happening in the mediatic and societal silence. We have to break this silence, and this is the message. And as said Prime Minister Morawiecki, this is the most important thing to fight before the European elections of June 2024. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Dr. Saryusz-Wolski. I think it was a brilliant point about this post-colonial aspect of the European Union. Yeah, super. And okay, we have very little time left. Mamy mało czasu. Czy ktoś z Państwa, zanim oddam
Would anyone like to take the floor, because I will soon pass the floor to the Prime Minister, but would anyone like to share their opinions, thoughts?
If not, no. Last chance. Going, gone. Okay, proszę bardzo.
Przepraszam bardzo, Mirosława Terlecka.
Mirosława Terlecka.
Jakie mamy szanse, żeby przejąć,
Chances do
powiedzmy,
we stand
konserwatyści, żeby przejąć władzę
for
w Unii
conservatives to
Europejskiej?
take power in the European Union?
In the sense of having the absolute majority, very, very small, to say the least. But yeah, the first step would be a blocking minority. Proszę bardzo.
For me in Polish, I have a specific question. Będzie lepiej, jak będę mówił po polsku.
I think it will be better if I speak Polish.
Moim zdaniem, no jest tak, że
In my opinion,
zmiany legislacyjne, centralizacja.
we are seeing centralization, legislative changes, but young people don't understand it. They're not interested in this. Your ordinary European is not interested. I used to be a teacher, and my students in Kraków, they were telling me that they're very happy to have colleagues from Spain, Italy, the UK, that can go for a beer, talk to them. They're not against migrants at all. So what do I tell them? That when migrants come, they will kill you. Perhaps we should be using a different language to talk about victory that you have asked about. We should focus on the economy. Audi is moving its operations to the US. The manufacturing of electrical motors. Bayer is moving to China. Other countries are moving from the EU to the UK. So I think we need to start talking about European economy here. That the debt mechanism, which is being introduced in line with the centralization, we already have the reconstruction fund, 800 billion euros that will be paid off until 2050. That's one problem. Secondly, in the new centralist assumptions, there is a fixed mechanism for EU debt. When we pass the rule to socialists and the Greens, they will continue to increase the debt of the EU. So I think we need to talk more about the economic crisis of the European Union, the debt disaster of the European Union. Of course, you can disagree with that. Why would we disagree? It is
Skoro
important.
nie ma więcej chętnych, to w takim razie poproszę pana premiera o jakieś słowo wieńczące, some concluding remark. Oh yeah, sure.
Yeah, I like to react on that. Of course, we should inform the young people. I spoke about the NGOs. They used 3.7 billion euros to create, to crawl in young people's minds and to teach them a certain narrative. What we see now is that, for example, in my country, the people are living at home till 30 years of age because they have no houses anymore because of all this migration and all this nitrogen problems. We cannot build houses and people are coming in so much that we cannot give our own young people houses anymore and they cannot start a family, so it's really a big problem. And of course, this 800 billion euros, we have to pay that back from 2028 till 2058. So these people, the Commission, they created this debt, and our children have to pay for that. Of course, we should inform them. But I made the same mistake. We, as conservatives or traditional of classic liberals, we always said, let us do the economy. But we made a huge mistake. We gave culture and education to the left. And this is how they transform people. Culture is very important. You see, they're watching Netflix. They look at common books. They have this video clips. Taylor Swift is now an issue, supporting the Democrats. Culture is so important to change the way our children are thinking. And also the education, we should get that back. We, as conservatives and classic liberals, made that mistake. So be aware of that. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone? No? Good. Prime Minister.
Thank you very much, really, to all the speakers. This was an excellent debate, and I would like to make only a couple of comments. One is very general. In my view, banging our head against this brick wall makes sense. Even if today it doesn't look like this, even if today, also, as Rob said, this huge money to NGOs, making our work much, much harder, I think that this very message, which you have excellently presented here, will permeate down to different societies all across Europe, sooner or later. I hope sooner, and it's not going to be too late, but it makes sense, all those conferences, all your voices, you're presenting this in a very clear way, and you should do this every day, again and again, banging this brick wall with your heads. You have fantastic heads. Do it more. Be brave, because this is the only way how we're gonna break this wall eventually and get to the hearts and minds of people across Europe, from the left, from the right, you know, doesn't matter. Really, it's important that everybody understands how dangerous this process is. That's my first point. Second, Bogdan and dear audience, I'm not so sure that it'd be so easy to explain that it's a debt issue, it's an economy issue, and so on, because it's a very the situation, economic situation, financial situation in Europe is very different in different parts of Europe, to say the least. Like even here, we have representatives of southern countries who are captive by the European Central Bank in particular, like Italy, even more than Spain, 175% of debt to GDP. They have to issue 35 to 40 billion approximately, or these are the data from at least 12 months ago, which I have in my head, of debt every month, and without an anchor buyer, without a purchase of 5 to 10 billion of those bonds, Italian bonds, by European Central Bank, they are, how to say it mildly, close to bankruptcy. So they are dependent on the European Central Bank from Frankfurt am Main. The situation in Germany, Denmark, Sweden, the Netherlands is different. The frugal states, they have much lower level of debt. They are actually capturing the additional value added from the Eurozone operations, and they are doing relatively well. If you compare the GDP growth in Italy for last 25 years, since the inception of Euro, and compare it to the Netherlands, to the growth in Germany, Denmark, it's a huge gap, huge gap. So it's not so easy to say. And by the way, the United States have much higher debt than Germany, even France, even Spain. Spain is around 100%. The United States is around 110%. I know, I said about southern states. So that's not so easy to explain it from through the economy stupid type of approach. It's much more ideological, it's much more related to the system as such operating in Europe. And my third comment is about the treaty changes which were presented excellently by you, all of you. I think we have to be very loud and very down to earth here. Exactly to your comment, Bogdan, people do not understand those changes. We have to translate them into day-to-day language of villages in Podkarpacie, in Lower Silesia, or Mazovia region, or any other region, Andalusia, Cantabria, Calabria, and all the other regions, and villages, and of course Prague and smaller villages in the Czech Republic. Because this is the only way how those people gonna understand that there is something rotten in the state of Denmark. This is not going in the right direction. It's better to stay with Lisbon, as Jacek was saying, Lisbon or death, rather than making further progress with this ideological. But we have to learn, and I have to learn, how to better explain it to the people of Lubartów, where I go tomorrow next to Lublin, a little Polish town. What does it mean for them, really? And that's my obligation. I'll try to be better in explaining this. I would like to ask all of you to do the same in all the countries. Because at the end of the day, I'm hopeful and I'm cautiously optimistic. This is such an ideological and bad project for Europe, a dangerous project for Europe that it's not gonna succeed. I'm skeptical about how Eurozone is going to, survive and function in 10 or 15 years' time. But these things need time, and we have two different dynamics going parallelly with each other, and we have to be brutally precise with our communication to the public, to people all over Europe, in particular in our respective countries. But I would like to thank Professor Legutko for leading this discussion, Margarita, Rob, and you two gentlemen as well, and of course Nikolai. You are great, and you should be doing this explanatory work all the time, because, as I said at the outset, banging our head against this European ideological, leftist in particular, neoliberal brick wall makes sense. Thank you.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Let me thank the panelists, and it is for me to inform you that the process of banging our heads against the wall will continue, because we'll have series of conferences in the near future in various countries, hopefully in Spain, the Netherlands, and we are In other words, we are everywhere and we will not give up. Thank you so much.